Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn, and today I have with me a friend, Rich Glomski. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We've known each other 8+ years, I think.
Yes.
You born in Texas?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you're a little unique in some Texans in that you have a degree both from A&M and UT.
That's right. I'm crossbred.
You're crossbred.
But I'm an Aggie at heart.
Okay. All right. So for all you Aggies out there, know he's on your side if he has to pick. So thanks for taking the time today, brother. It's an honor to have you here.
I'm pleased to be here.
We were chatting before the show and talked about maybe some directions we could go. And the place that you said was biggest on your heart to make sure we got to it. We'll just dive right in because hopefully the audience is as productive as you and I are, and they've got a full schedule. So let's get right to it. How do you personally, and then if that's different or if that's changed, or if you, as you coach CEOs, if there's some nuances there, unpack it for us. But how do you manage to balance work and life?
Okay. You know, I think, Joel, it could be the most critical issue that business leaders deal with on a daily basis. Often people would think it would be business related, organizational within the business related, or some other reason, but it really focuses in on how do we better live an integrated life. And for a lot of years, I really looked at work-life balance as the solution. So I've read a lot on work-life balance. I've tried to practice it in my coaching over the years. And I've tried to apply it in my own life. And it really hasn't worked. And so I've been scratching my head over, a lot of years trying to figure out what's not working. I was blaming myself. But what I've come to realize in the last few years is that work-life balance is about trying to solve a problem, and you can never solve the problem. You can never solve the problem. So the way that I try to look at it now, and I also coach my business owners with the idea of kind of reframing their thought process and look at rather than work-life balance, looking at it as work-life rhythm. So it's not solving a problem, it's managing attention. So you think about our lives day in and day out, whether we're raising kids or we're empty nesters, where we are in life, we have ups and downs each month of our life. So it's you try to balance that, you're not going to be able to succeed. It's really, if you can reframe your mind and think about managing attention rather than trying to solve a problem, it gives you a lot more flexibility and creates a lot more awareness of how we do manage those tensions.
Do you have any tips or tricks that you've learned over the years as you've looked at it with this new mindset?
Well, I think one thing is I try to bring my business owners. One of the first discussions I have is, what are the real priorities that you've set in life? So I get them to talk a little bit about how do they look at life and what they look like. What does it look like in terms of their own personal priorities? And I try to limit it to what your top 3 or top 4 priorities are. And so you get lots of different comments about what their priorities are. Oftentimes it's my kids, it's my work. Rarely is it about God. Rarely is it about God. And even if it is about God, then the next 2 or 3 priorities are really interesting when you start talking to people. So after I have this discussion with them, I try to bring them back to what the Bible says about priorities for all of us, not just me, not just you, but our CEOs and everybody else. It's God first, and if you're fortunate and blessed to be married, it's your spouse second, it's your kids third, it's your family, and then work is way down the list. So if you think about that and reflect on that, it begins to point out to you, if you have stresses in any of those areas, why there could be stress. So case in point, we're raising kids. Now, granted, sometimes kids take priority over our relationship with our spouse. And I've been through that. I have twin sons grown. But again, if we look at it as managing attention rather than trying to solve a problem, because you can't solve the problem when they take priority. There's got to be a reason in your mind that they have that priority. But it's only a temporary priority. And you can use that prioritization as a frame of reference and bring yourself back to the fact that, hey, number one priority is God. I should be spending a lot of time with him each and every day. Two, it's my spouse. So for, the woman business owner or the male business owner, it's their spouse. And sometimes it's like the light bulb going off because they've spent so much time with their kids and they wonder why their relationship is just, it's not as strong as it could be. It could be argumentative, all those sorts of things. Well, God's plan is not that design. It's focused on your partner first. It's hard for people with young kids to really swallow and think about that because their kids are very important to them, and we don't discount the importance of children and how much we love them and all those sorts of things. But if you start putting it in that sort of prioritization, things begin to make sense. And the ability to manage that tension, I won't say it becomes easier, but you can do a lot of pre-planning that way too.
You mentioned pre-planning young kids. I didn't do a lot of things well as a husband. By the way, you guys are at 41 years?
48 years.
48 years of marriage, sorry. Christine and I last month just celebrated 36. So
all right, congratulations.
I got 12 to catch up to you.
There you go.
But we're both still trying to catch up with Bill Sitter.
Yeah, 61.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So, but yeah, our kids are grown now, all in their 20s. Two of them are married. You talked about this intentionality and this rhythm. I'll share an example here, and maybe you have one you want to share. Again, I didn't do a lot of things right as a husband, but one thing we realized early on was we couldn't control the day-to-day rhythm with the kids. Right? Wake up with the sniffles. Nobody expected that. School. It snows outside. No school today. So we can't control life to that degree. But what we did say is, you know what, our birthdays. Christina's birthday's early in the year, our anniversary summertime, and my birthday's late in the year. So we said, for your birthday, for our anniversary, and for my birthday, we're going to get away at least one night.
Yes.
At least one night.
Yes.
So both of us knew, and I'll be honest, there was times that when Expedia was new and you could bid on a room, that was when the Expedia Priceline. You could bid on a room. We're on there bidding, and sometimes we'd win a room for $25, right? Because you got kids' shoes you got to buy, and life's happening,
Sure,
right?
sure.
But we're committed to that. We're going to make that night happen. So we'd win a room in Austin for $25, which is 90 minutes north of us. But that was our night. We got out of town, we spent the night in the hotel, and so 3 times a year, that was our intentional rhythm to keep each other a priority. And you may go, that's terrible, only 3 nights out of 365. Well, we tried to make other nights happen, but those were non-negotiable.
Yes.
And that was enough of a rhythm.
Yes.
That we said, okay, that I can count on. I'll have at least 24 hours. And often we'd stretch that into a weekend or whatever.
Yes.
But, and it was non-negotiable, and so.
I think that's a great word, non-negotiable.
Yeah, it was. And it didn't matter work. I missed a lot of nights at home, but 35 years in a row, we were together on our anniversaries. A
lot to be said for that.
Yeah, because that was a commitment I had made. And plus, I tell my bosses or my clients or whoever, it's my vacation with my wife this weekend, So anyway, have you found anything like that, practical rhythms that your clients or yourself have adopted over the years?
Well, let me answer that in an indirect way, because
Sure.
I have a real life example that just happened an hour ago with one of my members.
Great.
So I just coached one of my members.
Okay.
He happens to own a mid-sized accounting firm here in San Antonio, and his wife is being challenged by being a caregiver for her father.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and this is a young family, so they have 3 kids, and they're young kids, and so it's been incredibly difficult for him to get her away by herself because of this commitment she has with her dad, and because of the commitment of being mother of children. And he's got the commitment at work running a CPA firm. So yesterday, he was home and his wife wanted to go to the store. I think I've got the story right. Wanted to go to the store, and he said, I'll go with you. And one of the children balked and said, no, I want to go too. And my CEO member says, what do I do, Rich? What do you do in that situation when you've got a child that wants to join you going to the store? And I said, well, that's a great one to use as this prioritization. And you have to determine it, you have to make a choice of whether it's non-negotiable or not, but you just, you tell that child that we'll be back. Your older sister is here. She's going to take care of you. We'll be back in a few minutes, but mom and dad need to go. And it's just one of the examples that by setting that precedent, you're sending a message to your wife too.
Mm-hmm.
A very important message that she's very important to you. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing you do when you set those priorities, and you're explaining those priorities from your perspective to the rest of your family, particularly your wife, you look at her directly in the eyes and say, I love you so much. You are the second most important thing in my life. Mm-hmm. And you know what my number one priority is. But you're the second most important thing. The kids are important, but you're most important. Mm-hmm. So I think that sets a precedent for your relationship and continue to strengthen your relationship with your spouse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You and I both have had a stint in corporate life. Mm-hmm. More so there than in recent years, but I would hear people say, well, my wife and I are just growing apart. And, I'm a troubleshooter type guy. Mm-hmm. So I'd try to diagnose that, and I'd say, well, what do you mean? What's your schedule like? I'd say 98, if not 100% of the time, they'd say, well, when I'd get to the schedule question, well, we've got 2 kids and they're involved in all these things.
Yes.
And I was like, well, how's that break down during the week? Well, on Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, I'm with one child. And on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, I'm with the other child. And we try to, as a family, go to somebody's tournament on Sunday. And then my wife and I swap the next week. I'm like, so when you're not doing that, what are you doing? Well, we're doing homework. Well, no wonder after the highest time for divorces I hear lately is when the last kid graduates from high school. Because the husband and wife haven't been friends for 5 years.
No relationship, yeah. They've been just trying to survive, yes.
Yeah, they've been shuttling kids back and forth.
Yes.
And so hearing those kind of things in my 20s in corporate life made me even more determined, as the kids were coming along to go to my wife and say, we got to figure out how to break this cycle because this is the environment I'm in. So if I don't build these 3 times a year alone with you, I'll get sucked into that because
yes.
I was already addicted to the 80
yes.
and 100-hour work weeks.
Yes.
And the kids. So we actually went to the kids and say, hey, and we explained it to them in language we thought they would grasp. We are each other's priority. when you're gone and have your own families, we still want to be friends and still know each other.
Amen.
So you get one sport per season or one thing per season, right? So we still ended up 2 or 3 nights a week or, Saturdays or whatever. But there was some nights of the week we were together as a family. There was a night of the week most weeks I tried to take her out on a date, but we had to go to the kids and say, you don't get to do everything your friends want to do because your mom's a priority. And so did they get cheated out a little bit of life? Maybe.
I think we also shortchange the ability of our kids to understand that. And once they see the priority that you and I set on our wives compared to them, they know that we love them. Mm-hmm. We would do anything for them. They know that. But when they see that dad is taking care of mom and mom responds, that sends a lifelong, strong message to them. So do we know exactly how that helps them later on in life? No, we don't. But is it a positive visual statement and verbal statement? Absolutely it is to our kids.
What do you tell let me go a different direction.
Let me say something here that we're talking a lot about work-life rhythm because this is probably the key issue with all of my CEO coachings. It probably consumes anything above 75% of my conversations. Wow. I mean, we have business conversations, we have those sorts of things. But some aspect of this work-life rhythm, that's integrated life, how do I, as CEO, better balance this or manage the tension of this? It's the predominant
all the time.
Yeah, it's the predominant issue that I'm dialoguing with my members with.
Do you find that's actually a great segue to where I was going to go? Do you find that your CEOs, your business owners, is this like a aha epiphany moment where starting today I'm going to bring this thing into a better rhythm, or for the majority of them is it something they start making these small decisions and kind of work their way into a better rhythm?
I've had an occasional member where it's an aha, and there's an immediate change. Most of it, it's a progression, and it takes time, and so it's not overnight, but it's a continual reinforcement of that, and them holding themselves accountable. And at C12, we hold one another accountable at the forum. So all the business owners are holding one another accountable. That helps tremendously as well. And be accountable to your spouse, as an example, on this particular issue. And be authentic and live it the way that you're promoting it and telling her or him you're going to be living it.
As leaders don't like to use the word fear a lot. And I've actually started using it more the last couple of years because when you cut to the chase, a lot of things are rooted in fear. What do you think the fear is as you've interacted with leaders over the years about trying to bring things into rhythm?
I think the fear is I've just never tested it before. So it's the unknown. What if I mess it up? What if something happens? It's this all of a sudden they haven't experienced it, so it's an experiential thing. And I think that's a big obstacle for them. They just don't want to take the risk.
What would be at risk?
That's what I ask them. What's really at risk?
What do they usually say, their first answers?
For a spouse, it's she's going to say, I don't understand, or she'll get mad because we have to take care of the kids. Don't you understand that, Jim?
Okay. All right.
So those sorts of initial reactions.
Yeah. What any of them ever concerned about if my business isn't number one, then how am I going to keep it afloat? But my business needs me?
You and I think, I have not run into that as a significant issue, and I've been blessed because I think we've got Christian CEOs at our tables, at our forums. So I have not heard that one.
Okay, good. Rhythms. What's the benefit of getting into that rhythm, do you think? Whatever that rhythm is for this, it's probably individual, right?
Yes.
For my wife and I, it was those 3 days a year, at least 3 days a year that we could count on when things were rough and life was happening. We're like, yeah, but it's only 6 more weeks and we get to sneak away for a night or a weekend. And so that gave us a boost. That may not work for everybody. What have you seen kind of once somebody embraces this idea of I need to bring some more integration to my life? What do you see? What changes for them?
Well, I think for one thing, the rhythm, it doesn't have to necessarily be once a week or twice every other week, and we're going to do that forever. I think the important thing is just having the mindset and commitment to doing something different, and to commit to a periodic date night, as an example, or two or three days away with my wife, or going to the grocery store with my wife for an hour just to get out of the house, or spur of the moment sorts of things. The intentionality and the focus, you just start looking at those relationships a lot differently. Previously, you were weighted down by work, so you're distracted by other things. So it's getting in a rhythm. You have to commit to some sort of rhythm, whatever it might look like. I think it looks different for every person,
Sure.
like you said. And there's less of a distraction. Will you be distracted? Yes. Life distracts.
Yeah. When people find this rhythm, are they more joyful? Are they more at peace? What kind of characteristics do you see?
I think absolutely they are. Once they begin to experience what a marriage relationship, as an example, and I'm not a counselor, but this just is such a significant issue for our business owners today. There's so much stress and so much frustration, so much such tiredness that I see. It's so predominant. So to get them out of that mindset and the joy that comes with, I'm really looking forward to this date night with my wife, rather than bickering at one another. But I also think that in doing that, God changes your heart. I think the Holy Spirit's working on you too. If you look, I think that's another way of looking at it, that you're not solving a problem, it's realistic to have the expectations that this is really a rhythm. You're going to have the surprises like you talked about earlier in the conversation. Those things happen, and they'll continue to happen. But when you have a rhythm, you got something to look forward to.
Yeah, and the intentionality that it communicates.
Yes.
I'll be curious in years to come. Maybe I can ask my kids, "Hey, when we did this when you were little, how did that manifest in your lives decades later?"
Yes.
Maybe we can find out.
Well, this is Joel. This goes back to this particular question is very, very important to me, but I also see it as very, very important to those business owners that I coach. It's important to me because I know you know this, but I didn't come to the Lord until 20 years into my marriage. And I wasn't the leader of my family. My wife was. I was clueless. And because I was clueless, I didn't have a relationship with my twin sons. So I'm still in the process, and my boys are grown, but I'm still in the process of continuing to rebuild those relationships. It's not a regret. It's just part of what I experienced earlier in life. And once I once I recognized what God's priorities were for me, then it all changed.
Yeah.
And the peace and comfort, as he promises us, transcends all understanding. I can't describe it to you or anybody else, but it was life-changing.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
There's a redemption. It's, as long as we're still breathing, there's still an opportunity for God to fix things.
Amen.
Change of direction just a little bit. I want to take advantage of having you on the time that we do. How does a leader practice authenticity while fulfilling the expectations and responsibilities they have? So how do they be a leader and all that's expected and the responsibilities go with that, but also practice transparency or authenticity?
Okay. Good question. I think a leader of any organization, small or large, is tasked and has the responsibility to set the tone for the organization. So he sets the vision. We talk about vision, mission, purpose, core values. I think he or she should be instrumental in the development of those things up front. But yet at the same time, to practice leadership, I think you need to involve those team members around you. That was something that took me a while to learn about what leadership was all about. But to start with, you got to craft a vision and the core values. What type of culture are you trying to build here in the company that you're building? And stick with the core values yourself. If you're going to be authentic, you got to play the game the way that it's been portrayed, and you're the major portrayer, if you will.
So if you're not following the core values, somebody's got to call you out?
Absolutely. And I think what the leader has to do, and this goes contrary to culture too, leaders got to humble themselves, and they have to make themselves vulnerable. So even the example of going to the leadership team and say, if I'm not living the core values, or if I'm not doing something that I promised you that I would do, you need to call me out.
Is there a right way to do that? Say somebody listening to a podcast isn't a leader, they're subordinate. Is there a right way to call out your leader, or is there a wrong way maybe?
Sure. I mean, I think you want to maintain that professionalism, and if you're a member of the leadership team, if you've been there any length of time, you know the personality you're dealing with too. So I would just encourage you to be thank the business leader for being that vulnerable, and thank him for the ability that you have now of holding he or she accountable. That's a real blessing.
Mm-hmm. That's very rare.
It's very rare
in the grand scheme of things.
And I think the other thing is, Joel, when you talk about authenticity, if you've shared a vision and if you've shared core values, and we're trying to instill that in the company, however large you are, I think day in and day out, there are a multitude of ways of doing that, reinforcing it. If you're having meetings, where just informational meetings, or planning meetings, or where you're making decisions, remind them of what the vision is. Remind them of what our purpose is. Remind them of what the core values are. And you may pick out a particular core value that stands out in a particular day, and recognize somebody that's lived that core value in the meeting. So you continue to reinforce it. I don't think you can over-communicate that. So there are a lot of things a leader, I believe, should do that may sound repetitious, but you can't over-communicate those sorts of things.
Rich, seems like society in general wants more authenticity because so many people are fake, or, is it fake news? Is it real news? What's authentic? Is it, is that really a video that really happened, or is that something that somebody's doctored up, and can I trust it? Right. And we heard at Global Leadership Summit a few weeks back that distrust is now the default characteristic in most people's hearts and thoughts. Is there such a thing as a leader being too authentic or oversharing?
Kind of plastic. Yeah, and I think if you think you're pulling the wool over people's heads and faces, you're wrong. I mean, the research shows us that you can be 2 years old, and if you're not authentic, they know.
Yeah.
They know.
I think kids know better.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
they don't second guess themselves.
Yeah, and I think another thing that I'd like to share here about authenticity here is, and the distrust. I mean, that's a great way to put it in our culture today. I just completed the Colson Fellows Program, and one of the things that we concentrated on talking through was how do you develop trust? How does someone today that you're meeting for the first time, how do you develop trust? How can you have a genuine and authentic conversation with them if they don't know you from Adam? So the ability for someone to trust you, it's all about developing a relationship. So it's as quickly as you can. If it's a one-time shot, I'm not sure how trustworthy you can be to somebody that's really skeptical. You can share them your story and be vulnerable right from the get-go. In 2 minutes, share your story. And you don't know them from Adam, and you're being vulnerable to somebody you don't know. So that's one way of developing a relationship, an authentic relationship, and making them feel comfortable about the relationship so they'll be willing to share in turn.
So I'm assuming everything we've talked about so far with authenticity is more on a personal note. What about transparency with the numbers? Like, do you walk in and you go, call an all hands meeting? Hey guys, I don't know how we're going to make payroll this week, but good news is, I mean, how transparent or authentic is it? Different levels with different people? Is it just no holds barred? Just say whatever comes to mind. What are your thoughts?
Well, let me start. And again, I think it depends on scale of the organization, how many employees you have. But I think whatever their role is in the organization, I think you ought to be transparent on their role and the impact on the financials.
Okay.
If you can equate it back to that. I will tell you, though, that, and I'm a strong believer that the most important asset that you have in your company is your organizational capability, bar none. It's not IT, it's not the product you have. Those are all important, but it's your organizational capability. And if you're leaving much of the responsibility in many areas in operations, you got a CFO, you got a head of marketing, you got a head of HR. If you're asking them to manage those particular areas, you got to give them the latitude of knowing what those financials are and their impact on them. So you ought to be sharing the details of your financials certainly with your immediate leadership team.
So you're definitely in favor of more open book
Absolutely.
type environment.
Absolutely. A lot of debate about that,
Sure.
as you know.
Yeah. Speaking of open book and measurements, how do you kind of take a different turn here? How do you measure success? How would you define and measure success?
Well, are we talking about personal success? Or are we talking about business success?
I suppose personal success matters most, so let's go there first.
Okay.
But then,
well, I think you and I spend so much time and energy with our members about the importance of if we're doing a hiring of somebody new. The old adage of the technical skills are pretty easy to evaluate. It's the soft skills. So their energy, their drive, they're willing to be accountable, those sorts of things. There are tools out there that can measure all of that. My recommendation is you spend a lot of time evaluating people. business owner in a mature organization should be spending 70% of their time each and every day on organizational capability. Not on tactical issues, not on execution, but on people and in developing people. So if we know who we've hired and they understand what they're, and there's the other key thing, do we have a job description that very clearly describes what an individual does? It's a 50-50 proposition in my experience. Oh yes, we've got job descriptions for everybody, but if you look at the job descriptions, they're very generic. And the employee, in a lot of cases, doesn't truly understand what their roles and responsibilities are. So I think we have to ensure that our people that we steward as the business owners, that they have an adequate and clear understanding of what their role and responsibility is and the expectations. And we use that as foundational to hold them accountable. And you can start developing KPIs and all those other performance statistics based on that.
So if I hear you right, your recommendation is each role needs to understand its definition of success.
Yes. And let's involve them and engage them in the process of developing their own metrics. Now, we have a dissenting vote over here, the key dissenting vote, but let's get them involved in the development of those. That's to their benefit. That helps them professionally grow as well.
Yeah. A friend of mine is involved in a startup, and I said, do you have job descriptions? He's like, no. So I went to ChatGPT. In about 5 minutes, ChatGPT and I wrote a handful of job descriptions.
These are really good.
Yeah, they were actually pretty good. And what was cool about it, though, and I didn't think about this until when he went to hand them out in the meeting, the way it was presented to the employees was ChatGPT wrote these. So you're not going to hurt anybody's feelings if you don't like something on here. Now you take this as a starting point, and you caused me to think of this. You go add other things. You've been in the role now for weeks or months or whatever. Add things that ChatGPT missed. Strike things out of there that don't make sense. But it was this non-threatening way of involving the team in writing their own job descriptions.
Yes, great.
And it turned out to a really cool exercise. It was like I didn't expect that outcome, but it was a very he didn't have to spend hours trying to figure out and draft these job descriptions.
Yes.
He didn't have to have hours of preliminary meetings like what should even be in a job description. Literally in 5 minutes, I was done. I emailed them to him and said, have fun, and then in coaching, preparation for the meeting, this idea came to me about, well, tell them ChatGPT drafted it so you're not going to hurt anybody's feelings if they scratch it up, right? Mark it up. And so anyway, that was and then you just said some things. I was like, oh, they could go back and ask ChatGPT to come up with KPIs.
There you go.
Anyway, the AI is going to be fun, but
I think so too. And I hope the business community and culture gives it a chance. Will it be misused? Unfortunately, it probably will be.
The tool is
probably already beginning to be misused, but it can be. I see such potential for the tool and the methodology. It's just it's awesome. But KPIs from a leader standpoint. How do I measure my success in the organization? That's a good question. When we talk about KPIs, I like to talk to my CEOs about everybody establishing a dashboard, just like a car's dashboard. And in that dashboard, you have anywhere from 3 to 5 key performance indicators. And they don't all have to be financial. They can be people-oriented. They can be operationally oriented. Should there be some financials in there? Sure. What's absolutely critical for you on a daily basis to monitor the success of the organization? Not the 50 or 100 different things. that, by the way, you can make KPIs for those that report to you that feed you the information that allows you to summarize it up into 3 or 5 KPIs that you can manage the success of your organization from.
And that's where I like, there's lots of tools out there, but one I think shines in this area is 40X because of the simplicity of it and the research that they did. If you get too broad, nothing gets done.
Yes.
It's when you get narrow that you accomplish the most.
Yes.
And so that I like their methodology in that regard. But this idea that you've introduced of people helping come up with their own KPIs, I think is grossly overlooked by most leaders.
I think so.
You know, they'll come to a C12 meeting or they'll go to a conference or a seminar and they'll come back and go, here, we're going to measure these things.
Yeah, and unfortunately what that may do is dumb down your leadership team. And all of a sudden they don't feel the self-worth. I mean, we've got to pay attention to those nuances when we're bringing people along. Remember, as the stewards of these business, we're servant leaders. And the primary role of a servant leader is to ensure the success of our people. How do we do that? Through a lot of things that we've been talking about.
So my question a moment ago was, how do you define success? And as we're chatting here, I'm starting to have a thought that it's been with me for years, but maybe a new perspective. Really, the weight of leadership and maybe the true success definition is how well we develop the people following us.
Absolutely.
Like if you look back in time, my mind goes to some scriptural examples. I'm sure there's secular ones, but who is the greater leader, Moses or Joshua? Well, Joshua got him to the promised land, which is what he was. That was Moses' original final job outcome, was get him to the promised land. He messed that up.
Yep.
And so that was handed off to Joshua.
Yes.
Let me ask you, who was the big leader, major leader, influential leader that followed Joshua? Nobody knows. Right?
Dang, you're right.
Right?
Yeah.
So who did the better job? Moses, training up Joshua to do all the stuff that Moses was supposed to do and finish the mission, or Joshua that we don't know who came next?
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure it's buried in the text somewhere.
Yes.
But the point is nobody talks about the next guy. You know, they say Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it stops there.
That's a great segue into, we're talking about leadership here. Let's not assume that every leader in every position is your leader in the future in that position in the organization. It depends on where you are in that scale, and it may not be that person's ability at some point in time when you scale up to whatever the number is or number of people. They just don't have the capability. So I think part of leadership is also being able to discern how you grow your individual people that you currently have on board, and also how to determine whether or not those are the leaders that are going to go with you in the future, or whether or not somebody needs to help you too.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. What do you think is the biggest misconception people have about leadership?
The first thing that comes to mind is that not everybody's a leader. And I would have thought that early in my career, as I've gained a little gray hair and additional experience and wisdom, I've come to recognize that all of us are leaders. And even more reinforced by GLS, Global Leadership Summit, that we're all leaders. Whether we're a CEO of an organization or we have a administrative job in the organization, or we're a janitor in a school. They're all honorable jobs, but we can all be leaders, because leadership's all about being influential.
Yeah, that's good.
and adding significance to somebody's lives and helping somebody achieve their greatness, whatever that is.
Wouldn't the world be a better place if every human on the planet was striving to help somebody else be better?
Yeah, wouldn't it be? What would it look like, huh?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of places we could go, but just as we start to come to a close, thinking forward, what's your concern, or what do you see as the biggest challenges for the next generation of leadership?
You know, I would caution the up and coming leadership, those people that will be there, and say that the basic tenets have not changed. Culture is what changes. Don't let culture dictate what leadership is. So ground yourself in truth, in leadership truth. And I don't know a better way of grounding yourself than through biblical truth. And you have some wonderful examples out there in the marketplace. There's some wonderful literature out there. So just ground yourself in some of the key literature that stands the test of time. But don't be seduced by current culture or the latest and greatest novel idea. You and I both have seen, thousands and thousands of leadership books, and a lot of those are very fleeting.
Yeah, there's very few that stand the test of time.
Yeah, so that's a high level way of putting it. But and I think continuing to emphasize the importance of being a good listener, being empathetic, making yourself vulnerable. Think about those. A lot of those are contrary to what we believe culturally. And those stand the test of time. With the two leaders you talk about, as an example, Moses and Joshua. You have two very humble and empathetic leaders based on what they did on the truth.
Yeah. Not sure you read the book. It's probably 20, 25 years old at least. The Millionaire Next Door.
I have not.
And it was a couple of PhDs doing research on America.
I remember the TV show that dates me now, called The Millionaire.
Yeah. So this book was The Millionaire Next Door, and the premise was these PhDs were going to go out and talk to the everyday millionaire. So not the ones that you see on Hollywood, but the bulk of American millionaires aren't on TV or are not have former presidents of the United States. But the bulk of them are, guys that drive. What do they drive? How do they dress? What do these ladies, do they carry the fancy purses or what? And what they found overwhelmingly is that everything we have been taught to believe through TV and whatnot was almost 100% wrong with the typical American millionaire. At the time, the typical American millionaire drove a Ford F-150 or Toyota Camry. The typical American millionaire. Now, remember, millionaire is based on your net worth, not your income.
That's right.
And so they talked about big hat, no cattle, so you have these guys that they'd had the big cowboy hat and put on the show, but they didn't really own any heads of cattle. There wasn't a whole lot of assets they could point to. And what they found was, and I want to see if this has been your experience. What they found was the typical American millionaire business owner type person was actually most of the time, vast majority of the time, a nice person that actually did care about people, that actually did want the businesses doing the right thing for the right reasons, that actually wasn't in it just for the money, and all those things that were the antithesis of what we see in Hollywood,
right,
or on TV. Has that been your experience as you're out?
I think so too, because they're not dealing with the plastic world out there. They're dealing with everyday life. I have just a great story that you just remind me of. Way back in my career, I was working at KPMG at the time, and I was out in West Texas, just in a small community north of Amarillo. And I was interviewing a bank president, and it was, typical small country bank in West Texas. It's got mahogany row with glass offices. So I have my back to the teller line, and the president is talking, and we were engaged in a pretty serious conversation. All of a sudden, I see his eyes being distracted, and he kept looking over the teller line, and he got up right in mid-sentence and said, I'll be right back. I have a customer I need to talk to. So I'm going, well, okay. So just out of curiosity, I turned around and see who he was talking about, and there's this little old lady that walked in, and she had a pair of rolled-up jeans from the bottom up, and she had a work shirt on. She was probably 5'5", 5'4", tiny, tiny woman. And she has this huge paper garbage bag with her, and she puts it up on the teller counter. And the president comes over and grabs her hand and gives her a hug, and they talk for a few minutes. And then he proceeds to put the bag and give it to the teller. So he talks a couple more minutes, and he comes back in, and I didn't ask him, and he said, I just want to tell you what an authentic millionaire looks like, to your point earlier. And here's this little old lady who was on oil and gas property, and this is royalty income that she got in cash. She didn't want it in a check. She didn't want it deposited in her bank account. She wanted it in cash from whatever company it was. So she came in once a week with this bag of money. She'd drive in her pickup with this bag of money and deposit in the bank. So there's a great example. And he said they were a great family. They were not pretentious or anything, but to your point, that's been my experience. Yeah.
It's a bag of money once a
week. Bag of money.
I was expecting like once a month or once a quarter.
Once a week.
Once a week. I'd like.
He didn't tell me how much was in the bag.
I don't care if it's all once. That's still
right. Still a lot of money.
Still a lot of money for getting it on the side. Yeah. But anyway, Rich, it's been a pleasure having you here today.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed this very much.
Well, thanks for coming out.
Yeah, I appreciate the dialogue. Thank you.
Absolutely. Love you, brother.
Love you.